The last time Ethan saw his wife, she was standing in the doorway of their penthouse, bathed in the soft morning light, a gentle smile on her face. She was 6 months pregnant with their first child, and to him, she was the perfect picture of domestic bliss. He blew her a kiss, promised he wouldn't be late, and walked out of her life forever. He just didn't know it yet. What he would discover over the next 9 months would not only shatter his world, but redefine the very meaning of power, love, and loss. This is the story of how a woman disappeared to find herself, and how a man had to lose everything to finally see the truth. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now let's dive in. The late afternoon sun was a river of liquid gold, pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse Ava called home. It glinted off the chrome legs of the minimalist Italian sofa, warmed the polished marble floors, and cast long, dancing shadows that stretched from the abstract sculptures to the state-of-the-art kitchen. At 28, Ava was living a life most people only saw in magazines. She was the beautiful, 6 months pregnant wife of Ethan Vance, a charismatic real estate mogul whose ambition was as vast as the city skyline visible from their balcony. Their life was a carefully curated collection of perfect moments. Weekend trips to Napa on a whim, surprise diamond earrings left on her pillow, romantic dinners at restaurants where the wait list was a year long. Ethan was a master of the grand gesture, a man who knew how to build an empire and, seemingly, a perfect marriage. Ava had once believed in that perfection with every fiber of her being. She had fallen for his sharp intelligence, his disarming smile, and the way he made her feel like the only person in a crowded room. He was her anchor, her partner, her future. But lately, the anchor had felt adrift. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift had occurred in the architecture of their relationship. The foundation felt less stable. Ethan's schedule, once predictable, had become a chaotic mess of late-night meetings that stretched into the early morning and last-minute business trips he only mentioned as he was packing his bag. The easy affection that had once defined them, the casual touches, the whispered inside jokes, had been replaced by a polite, almost formal distance. When he did look at her, his eyes seemed to see through her, his mind already on the next deal, the next conquest. Ava tried to rationalize it. It was the stress of a new acquisition, she told herself. It was the pressure of maintaining his empire. Or maybe, just maybe, it was her. Pregnancy had made her more sensitive, her emotions a turbulent sea of hormones. She found herself scrutinizing his every word, every glance, searching for cracks in a facade she desperately wanted to remain flawless. Was she just being a cliché? The needy, hormonal, pregnant wife? The thought made her cringe. Determined to bridge the growing chasm between them, she doubled her efforts. She became the epitome of the loving, supportive wife. She cooked his favorite meals, even when the smell made her morning sickness flare. She left little notes in his briefcase, filled with words of encouragement and love. She'd send him sonogram photos of their unborn son, tiny black and white images of a future she was building for them, for their family. "Look at his little hands, E," she'd text, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "He's waving at you." His replies were always delayed, always brief. "Amazing, eh? Can't wait to meet him." The words were right, but the feeling was wrong. They were hollow, like echoes in an empty room. One evening she waited for him, a pot of his favorite bolognese simmering on the stove. The clock ticked past 8, then 9, then 10. She called his cell. It went straight to voicemail. She texted. No reply. Just after 11, he walked in, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't hers and the stale chill of the city night. Sorry, babe, he said, loosening his tie as he breezed past her. The Henderson deal is a monster. I'm completely drained. He didn't kiss her. He didn't even look at the beautifully set table. He just headed for the shower, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, the scent of his infidelity hanging in the air, more potent than the aroma of her carefully prepared meal. She stood there for a long time, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The baby kicked, a small, insistent flutter against her palm. It was a reminder of the life she was nurturing, a life she had to protect. In that moment, surrounded by the opulent emptiness of her perfect life, Ava felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This wasn't just hormonal overreaction. This was real. The beautiful dream she had been living was fraying at the edges, and she was terrified of what would happen when it finally unraveled completely. She had to know the truth, even if it destroyed her. The decision was impulsive, born from a desperate need to reclaim a piece of the man she was losing. For days, the distance between them had grown into a silent, yawning canyon. Ethan was a ghost in their home, a phantom who left behind the scent of expensive cologne and a lingering sense of unease. Ava knew she couldn't endure another night of feigned normalcy, of sitting across a dinner table from a stranger wearing her husband's face. She needed to do something, to make a gesture so undeniably loving that it would have to break through the wall he had built around himself. So, on a Tuesday evening, with a relentless, dreary rain lashing against the windows of the penthouse, she decided to surprise him. She packed a gourmet dinner in an insulated bag, roast beef sandwiches on ciabatta, a thermos of hot tomato soup, and the chocolate lava cakes he adored. It was a callback to their early dating days, when they were young and broke, and a shared meal in his cramped office felt more intimate than any five-star restaurant. She wanted to remind him of that, of the time when they were just Ava and Ethan, before the millions and the penthouse and the suffocating weight of expectations. The drive downtown was a blur of slick, glistening streets and the rhythmic thump of the windshield wipers, each sweep a metronome counting down to a moment she couldn't yet comprehend. The Vance Tower was a sleek, imposing monolith of glass and steel, a monument to Ethan's ambition. The lobby was mostly deserted, the security guard giving her a familiar nod as she headed for the private elevator that went directly to the executive floor. The 30-second ride felt like an eternity. With each ascending floor, her anxiety tightened its grip. What if he was annoyed? What if this was a stupid, desperate move? She pushed the thoughts away, clutching the dinner bag like a shield. She was his wife. She was carrying his child. She had every right to be here. The elevator doors opened to a hallway of hushed, expensive silence. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of her footsteps. Most of the offices were dark, but a sliver of light escaped from under the door at the far end of the hall, Ethan's office. As she drew closer, she heard it. A sound that didn't belong in the sterile, professional quiet of the corporate floor. Laughter. A woman's laughter, light and unrestrained, followed by Ethan's deeper, rumbling chuckle. Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. She slowed her pace, her breath catching in her throat. She crept the last few feet to the door, which was slightly ajar. Peeking through the narrow opening, the world tilted on its axis. Ethan wasn't at his desk, buried in paperwork. He was on the plush leather sofa that faced the window, the city lights a glittering backdrop to his betrayal. And he wasn't alone. A woman with sleek, dark hair and a form-fitting red dress was curled up beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. It was Sienna, his new head of marketing, a woman Ava had met briefly at a company event, a woman whose sharp ambition she had noted with a flicker of professional admiration. But this was not professional. Ethan's arm was wrapped around her, his fingers toying with a strand of her hair. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and Sienna laughed again, tilting her head back to look at him. The look that passed between them was not one of fleeting attraction or a drunken mistake. It was a look of deep, settled intimacy, of devotion. He looked at Sienna the way he used to look at her. Ava felt the air leave her lungs in a silent, ragged gasp. The dinner bag suddenly felt impossibly heavy, its warmth a cruel mockery of the cold that was spreading through her veins. She saw Sienna reach up and trace the line of his jaw with a perfectly manicured finger, a gesture of ownership so casual, so confident, it made Ava's stomach clench. She backed away from the door, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't make a sound. She didn't run. She didn't cry. Not yet. A strange, chilling clarity washed over her. The shock was so profound it transcended pain, leaving behind a hollow, ringing numbness. This wasn't just an affair. This was a replacement. He hadn't just found another woman. He had found another life, one that didn't include her or their unborn child. She turned and walked back down the long, silent hallway, her reflection a ghostly figure in the polished glass walls. She stepped into the elevator, the dinner bag still clutched in her hand, and pressed the button for the lobby. As the door slid shut, sealing her in with the devastating truth, she finally looked down at the bag. The dream of their future, of their family, wasn't just broken. It was a lie, and she had been the only one living it. The descent back to the ground floor was the beginning of a much longer, much deeper fall. The night was a sleepless, suffocating blur. Ava lay in their king-sized bed, the space beside her cold and empty, until Ethan finally slipped in sometime after 2 a.m., his breathing heavy with the scent of another woman's perfume and a day's worth of lies. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just lay there, her eyes wide open in the darkness, her hand resting on her belly, feeling the rhythmic, innocent kicks of the child who was tethered to a life built on deceit. The image of Ethan and Sienna on that sofa was seared into her mind, a looping, silent film of betrayal that played over and over again. The next morning, she tried. For the sake of the child, for the sake of the vows she had once believed in, she made one last, desperate attempt to salvage the wreckage. She found Ethan in the kitchen, already dressed in a crisp suit, scrolling through emails on his phone as he sipped his espresso. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her insides were trembling. He glanced up, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before he smoothed it over with his usual charming smile. "Morning, beautiful. Can it wait? I've got back-to-back meetings starting at 8. The Henderson deal is at a critical stage." "No, it can't wait," she insisted, stepping in front of him, blocking his path to the door. "This is important," he sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated impatience. "Ava, whatever it is, we can discuss it tonight. I promise. I'll be home early." He leaned in to kiss her cheek, a perfunctory, dismissive gesture. "Don't stress, okay? It's not good for the baby," and that was it. The casual, condescending way he used their child as a tool to manage her, to silence her, was the final, brutal blow. In that instant, something inside her snapped. The heartbreak, the shock, the grief. It all coalesced into a cold, hard diamond of resolve. She realized with chilling certainty that there was nothing he could say that would fix this. An apology would be a lie. A promise would be an insult. The trust that had been the bedrock of their marriage was not just cracked. It was pulverized into dust. You couldn't rebuild on dust. As he walked out the door, blowing her a careless kiss, Ava didn't see her husband anymore. She saw a stranger, a very convincing actor who had played the part of a loving husband while living a double life, and she would not be his audience for one more day. The decision to leave wasn't a dramatic, tear-filled choice. It was a quiet, logical conclusion. She couldn't raise her child in a house filled with lies. She couldn't let her son grow up thinking that what his father did was acceptable, that love was disposable. She had to protect him, and to do that, she had to disappear. The rest of the day, she moved with a strange, detached efficiency. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in her chest, but it was now overlaid with a sense of purpose. She sat at her laptop, not shopping for designer baby clothes, but researching small, forgotten towns on the coast, places where a person could be anonymous, where the sea could wash away the past. She contacted a distant cousin she hadn't spoken to in years, a woman who lived a quiet life in Oregon, and asked vague questions about the Pacific Northwest. She began to quietly extract herself from the life Ethan had built for her. She went to the bank and withdrew a few $1,000s in cash, a small enough amount not to raise any red flags. She sorted through her belongings, packing a single, nondescript duffel bag with only the most essential items: comfortable clothes, a few cherished books, the prenatal vitamins she never missed, and a small, worn teddy bear that had been hers as a child. Everything else, the designer handbags, the expensive jewelry, the life she had once treasured, she left behind. It was all just part of the set, props in a play she was no longer a part of. Her final act was the most painful. She walked into their bedroom and took the large, silver-framed wedding photo from the nightstand. It was a picture of them on a beach in Bali, both of them sun-kissed and laughing. The picture of happiness. With numb fingers, she opened the back of the frame, slipped the photo out, and tore it in half. The sound of the ripping paper, a final, definitive severing of their bond. She left the empty frame on the nightstand, a silent, stark testament to what he had broken. She hid the packed duffel bag in the back of her closet, behind a row of evening gowns she would never wear again. As she looked around the silent, opulent penthouse, she felt a profound sense of detachment. This wasn't her home anymore. It was a gilded cage, and she had just found the key. She would wait for the right moment, a time when he was away on one of his business trips, and then she would walk out the door and never look back. She wasn't running away. She was running toward a future she would build herself, for herself and for her son, a future built on truth, not lies. Ethan came home 2 days later, humming a tune from a commercial he'd heard on the radio. He was riding high. The Henderson deal had been a massive success, a testament to his prowess, and he'd spent the last 48 hours celebrating with Sienna in a boutique hotel, a celebration that had solidified their secret partnership in both business and pleasure. He walked into the penthouse, expecting to find Ava on the sofa, probably asleep with a book on her lap, ready to be placated with a story about his grueling work trip and a gift from the airport. Instead, he was met with an unsettling silence. The apartment was immaculate, too neat. There were no magazines on the coffee table, no half-empty glass of water on the counter. It felt sterile, like a hotel room that had just been cleaned. "Ava?" he called out, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. No answer. He walked into the bedroom. The bed was perfectly made. He checked the closet. A significant portion of her clothes was gone. Not the expensive gowns or designer suits, he noted with a strange sense of relief, but her everyday things: jeans, sweaters, comfortable shoes. He walked into the bathroom. Her toothbrush was missing, along with her favorite face wash, and the prenatal vitamins she was so diligent about. A flicker of irritation sparked within him. Was this some kind of game? A dramatic, passive-aggressive punishment for his absence? He pulled out his phone to call her, ready to deliver a lecture on her childish behavior. That's when he saw it, sitting on her nightstand, her phone. And beside it, the empty silver frame, its glass staring up at him like a blind eye. A cold knot of dread began to form in his stomach. This wasn't a game. Ava would never leave her phone behind. It was her lifeline, her connection to her family, her doctor, the world. He frantically called her mother, her sister, her two closest friends. Each conversation was the same. No one had seen her. No one had heard from her. The last anyone had spoken to her was 3 days ago, and she had sounded, in their words, a little down, but fine. Panic, real and raw, finally set in. He called the police, his voice a convincing performance of a distraught husband on the edge of collapse. The officers who arrived were professional, but detached, their questions sharp and probing. Had they argued? Were there any financial problems? Was she unhappy? Ethan played his part to perfection, painting a picture of a blissful marriage and a deeply loved, if emotionally fragile, pregnant wife. The next day, the story broke. Pregnant wife of millionaire Ethan Vance vanishes without a trace. Ava's smiling face was plastered across news websites and television screens. The media descended like vultures, their cameras and microphones a constant presence outside the Vance Tower. Ethan, guided by a team of high-priced public relations experts, embraced the role of the grieving husband. He gave tearful press conferences, his voice cracking as he pleaded for any information, for his beloved Ava to come home. He announced a $100,000 reward, a figure designed to signal desperation and immense wealth. The public ate it up. Sympathy poured in from all corners. He was the tragic hero, the powerful man brought to his knees by a cruel twist of fate. Privately, however, the narrative was very different. In the stolen moments he had with Sienna, his public grief morphed into a bitter, resentful anger. "She's doing this to punish me," he seethed during a hushed phone call. "She must have found out. This is her way of destroying me, of making me look like the bad guy." Sienna, for her part, tried to be supportive, but a seed of resentment was beginning to take root. She had signed up to be the mistress of a powerful, charismatic man, a position that came with glamour and excitement. She had not signed up for this. Ava's ghostly presence was everywhere. She was in the sympathetic looks from strangers, in the hushed whispers of Ethan's colleagues, in the very air of the penthouse that still felt like it belonged to another woman. Ava, in her absence, had become a martyr, a saint, and Sienna was, by default, the villain of a story she couldn't control. Ethan's public pleas grew more desperate, his performance more polished. He sat for a prime-time interview, dabbing at his dry eyes as he looked directly into the camera. "Ava, my love, if you can see this, please just let us know you're safe. I can't live without you. Our son needs his mother. I need you." But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into a month, the investigation stalled. There were no leads, no sightings, no activity on her bank accounts or credit cards. It was as if Ava had simply stepped out of her life and dissolved into thin air. Ethan's public facade began to crack under the strain of his own lies, the chasm between his private fury and his public sorrow widening into an unsustainable gulf. He was the worried husband to the world, but in the dead of night, staring at the empty space beside him in bed, he was just a man haunted by the ghost of a woman he had fatally underestimated. While Ethan Vance was performing for the cameras in New York City, Ava was 3,000 miles away, breathing in the salty, damp air of the Pacific Northwest. She had become Claire, a name she'd plucked from a novel she loved. The town she had chosen was a tiny, forgotten dot on the Oregon coast named Port Blossom. It was a place of weathered seaside cottages, a single main street with a grocery store and a diner, and a rugged, wind-swept beach where the relentless grey waves of the Pacific crashed against volcanic rock formations. It was the perfect place to be invisible. Her new home was a small, cedar-shingled cottage perched on a bluff overlooking the ocean. It was old and creaked in the wind, and the scent of salt and damp wood was permanently etched into its walls. After the sterile, modern opulence of the penthouse, the cottage felt wonderfully, groundingly real. She paid the first 6 months' rent in cash to an elderly landlord who seemed more interested in her promise to tend the small garden than in her lack of references. Life as Claire was simple, quiet, and anonymous. She was the polite, solitary newcomer who kept to herself. She bought her groceries on Tuesdays, smiled at the cashier, and returned to her cottage. Her days fell into a gentle, healing rhythm. She would wake with the sun, make a simple breakfast, and then spend hours walking on the beach, the cold sand sinking under her feet. She watched the fishermen mend their nets, and the seabirds dive for their prey. The vast, churning expanse of the ocean made her own problems feel small, manageable. The constant roar of the waves was a soothing balm to her fractured soul, washing away the noise and deceit of her old life. To support herself, she fell back on her skills as a graphic designer, a career she had put on hold to become Mrs. Ethan Vance. She found freelance work online through platforms that allowed her to work for clients across the globe, receiving payments through a secure, untraceable system. Her work was her connection to the outside world, but it was a connection on her own terms, filtered through the safety of a screen and a pseudonym. She meticulously avoided creating any official records. She didn't get a driver's license. She didn't register to vote. Most importantly, she avoided doctors. She knew it was a risk, but the fear of being found was greater than her fear of the unknown. She bought books on midwifery and natural childbirth, devouring information, preparing herself for the monumental task ahead. She was a good student, diligent and focused. She learned about breathing techniques, labor positions, and how to handle potential complications. Her pregnancy became her private, sacred journey, a partnership between just her and her unborn child. In the evenings, she would sit by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of lavender and rose, and she would write. She filled journals with letters to her son, telling him not of the father who had betrayed them, but of the life she dreamed for him. A life of honesty, resilience, and quiet strength. She wrote about the courage it takes to walk away from something that is broken, and the strength it takes to build something new from the wreckage. I want you to know the sound of the ocean, my love, she wrote one night, her hand resting on her belly, which was now large and taut. I want you to know that your world is not defined by glass towers and empty promises, but by the tides and the stars and the goodness of your own heart. You are my fresh start. You are my brave new world. The months passed. Her belly grew, and so did her confidence. She was no longer Ava Vance, the millionaire's wife. She was Claire, a woman standing on her own 2 feet, supported not by a man's wealth, but by her own ingenuity and resolve. Her labor began on a wild, stormy night in late winter. The wind howled around the little cottage, and the rain beat against the windows in furious, horizontal sheets. The power went out, plunging her into darkness, lit only by a handful of candles she had prepared. She was alone, terrified, but also strangely empowered. As the storm raged outside, a different kind of storm raged within her. It was primal, painful, and utterly transformative. There were no doctors, no nurses, no husband holding her hand. There was only her body's ancient wisdom, and the fierce, protective love for the child she was about to meet. In the pre-dawn hours, as the storm finally began to subside, her son was born. She pulled him onto her chest, his tiny, warm body slick against hers, and his first cry mingled with the sound of the receding waves. She looked down at his perfect, scrunched-up face, and tears of exhaustion, relief, and overwhelming love streamed down her face. She had done it. She had brought him into the world, safely, on her own terms. She named him Noah, a name that meant rest and comfort. He was her ark in the storm, her promise of a new beginning. Cradling him in her arms in the quiet, candle-lit cottage, with the ocean as their witness, Ava felt a profound sense of peace. She had been erased, but in her place, a new woman had been born. A mother, a survivor, a force to be reckoned with. In the months following Ava's disappearance, Ethan's carefully constructed world began to unravel, thread by insidious thread. He had always seen himself as the sole architect of his success, the visionary, the deal-maker. He had viewed Ava as a beautiful, supportive accessory to his life, the person who managed the trivial domestic details so he could focus on the important work of building his empire. He had never understood that she was not just an accessory. She was the foundation. Ava had been the silent, invisible force behind his polished public persona. She was the one who remembered his clients' birthdays and their wives' favorite flowers. She was the one who seamlessly organized the charity dinners and corporate galas that were crucial for networking, ensuring every detail was perfect, from the seating charts to the wine pairings. She was the one who managed their social calendar with the precision of a military strategist, creating the effortless illusion of a man who had it all. Without her, the cracks began to show. He missed important meetings because he'd forgotten to check the shared calendar she used to manage. He offended a potential investor by forgetting his name, a detail Ava would have drilled into him before the event. Deals that had once seemed certain began to falter, his legendary Midas touch seemingly deserting him. His colleagues and rivals started to whisper. The disappearance of his wife was a tragedy, yes, but the subsequent decline in his business acumen was a weakness, and in their world, weakness was blood in the water. The rumors about his affair with Sienna, once hushed speculation, began to gain traction. A disgruntled former assistant, fired by Ethan in a fit of rage, leaked details of his frequent late-night meetings with his head of marketing. The story didn't make the mainstream news, but it circulated with venomous speed through the tight-knit circles of New York's business and social elite. The public sympathy that had once been his shield began to erode, replaced by a cynical, knowing suspicion. He was no longer the tragic hero. He was becoming a pariah. His relationship with Sienna, which had been a thrilling escape, soured into a toxic codependency. Sienna had been attracted to the powerful, confident titan of industry. The man she was now living with was a shell of that person, irritable, paranoid, and obsessed with his missing wife. She had moved into the penthouse, a move she had once dreamed of, but it felt like she was squatting in a museum dedicated to Saint Ava. Ethan refused to get rid of Ava's things. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books were still on the nightstand, her perfume still lingered faintly in the air. Sienna felt like a ghost haunting another woman's life. She resented Ava's lingering, sainted presence. She resented the pitying looks she received from people who knew or suspected her role in the marriage's demise. And most of all, She resented Ethan's growing inability to separate her from his downfall. "If you hadn't been so careless, she might never have found out," he snarled at her one night after losing a major contract. "I was careless," Sienna shot back, her voice dripping with scorn. "You were the one married, Ethan. You were the one who lied to her every single day. This is not my fault. This is the mess you made." The arguments became more frequent, more vicious. The glamour of the affair had faded, revealing the ugly reality beneath. A relationship built on deceit and convenience could not withstand real pressure. Sienna began to see Ethan not as a powerful protector, but as a weak man flailing in the wreckage of his own making. His wealth, which had once been a powerful aphrodisiac, now seemed like a hollow compensation for the hollowness of his character. She started quietly sending out her resume, building her own exit strategy. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and she was smart enough to know when it was time to unhitch it. Ethan, meanwhile, was trapped in a downward spiral of his own making. He drank more, slept less. He would find himself wandering through the silent, cavernous penthouse at night, touching the things Ava had left behind. A strange mix of fury and a longing so profound it felt like a physical ache. He had thought he could have it all, the devoted wife and the exciting mistress. He had believed he was in control. Now he was losing everything, and he couldn't understand why. He had fatally miscalculated the value of what he'd had, and the true cost of his betrayal was only just beginning to come due. The Silver Hope Gala was the crown jewel of New York's philanthropic season, a glittering affair where the city's old money and new power collided. For Ethan, it was more than a party. It was a lifeline. His business was bleeding, his reputation was in tatters, and he desperately needed to secure new investors. He needed to project an image of stability and strength, to remind the world that he was still Ethan Vance, the man who could move mountains. He arrived alone, Sienna having finally and officially left him the week before, a departure that felt less like a heartbreak and more like another asset being liquidated. He moved through the opulent ballroom, a glass of champagne in hand, forcing a smile, shaking hands, his eyes scanning the crowd for potential backers. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his back. The vultures were circling. He could feel their eyes on him, their whispers following him like a shadow. And then the room went quiet. Not a sudden, dramatic silence, but a slow, rolling wave of stillness that started at the grand entrance and spread through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Ethan turned, annoyed at the distraction, and his world stopped. Standing in the arched doorway, framed by the light, was Ava. But it wasn't the Ava he remembered. The soft, accommodating woman he had taken for granted was gone. In her place stood a goddess. She was radiant, dressed in a breathtaking emerald green gown that clung to her curves, her hair styled in elegant waves, her face illuminated by a serene, unshakable confidence. She looked powerful. She looked magnificent. And she was not alone. Cradled in her arms, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, was a beautiful baby boy with a tuft of dark hair and his mother's calm, observant eyes. Ethan felt the champagne glass slip from his numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the shattering of his own composure. It was her. After 9 months of silence, of nothing, here she was, looking like she had just stepped out of a dream. His dream, the one he had destroyed. Before he could move, before he could even process what he was seeing, several of the city's most influential figures, the very people Ethan had been desperate to impress, converged on Ava. There was Jonathan Sterling, the revered head of the Gala's charitable foundation, who greeted her with a warm, paternal kiss on the cheek. There was Eleanor Vance, no relation, but the matriarch of one of New York's oldest families, who cooed over the baby. A murmur rippled through the crowd as the realization dawned. Ava wasn't just a guest. A quick glance at the event program in a nearby guest's hand confirmed the unthinkable. Under the list of the Foundation's board members was a new name, Ava Dubois, her mother's maiden name. She had not only survived, she had ascended. The position on that board was something Ethan had coveted for years, a seat that guaranteed access and influence, and she had taken it. She moved through the room with an effortless grace, politely ignoring Ethan's very existence. She laughed with a tech billionaire, discussed policy with a senator, and charmed everyone she met. She was not the victim. She was the victor. Finally, Ethan managed to corner her near a secluded terrace. "Ava," he breathed, his voice hoarse. "What is this? Where have you been?" She turned to him, her expression not of anger or pain, but of cool, detached assessment. She adjusted Noah in her arms. "I've been building a life, Ethan. A real one." "A life? You disappeared. We all thought you were. You thought I was what? A victim? Helpless?" She finished for him, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "You thought I couldn't survive without you. That was always your biggest mistake. You never actually saw me. I want to see my son," he said, his eyes fixed on the baby. "His name is Noah," she said, her voice firm, protective. "And no, you don't get to. Not like this. I left to protect him from a world of lies and betrayal. I will not bring him back into it." From across the room, Sienna, who had come to the gala with a new, older and more stable benefactor, watched the exchange. She saw the power dynamic, clear as day. She saw the way people flocked to Ava, the genuine respect and admiration in their eyes. She saw the way Ethan looked at his wife, defeated, desperate, utterly powerless. In that moment, Sienna knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice in leaving him. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost the source of his power. He was a hollow man, and Ava was the one who had finally exposed him. Ethan reached out, as if to touch Noah's cheek, but Ava took a step back, her eyes like chips of ice. "Don't," she said, her voice low but carrying the weight of an iron command. "You have no right. You gave up that right 9 months ago on a leather sofa in your office." She turned her back on him, leaving him standing alone on the terrace, the sounds of the party, of her success, washing over him. He was the ghost now, invisible in a room where his wife was the brilliant, burning sun. The Silver Hope Gala was not an end. It was a declaration. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's desperate attempts to contact Ava were met with a wall of impenetrable silence. His calls were routed through her assistant, a briskly efficient woman who informed him that Ms. Dubois' schedule was full. His emails went unanswered. The legal papers that arrived at his office were not for a messy, emotional divorce, but for a meticulously prepared child support and custody agreement drafted by one of the city's top family law attorneys. The terms were non-negotiable. He would provide financial support, and in return, he would be granted supervised visitation twice a month at a neutral location, pending the completion of a court-mandated anger management and co-parenting course. There was no room for argument. It was a business deal, and she held all the cards. Ava, or rather, Ms. Dubois, had played her hand with masterful precision. The story of her return was even more compelling than the story of her disappearance. She gave one, and only one, exclusive interview to a respected journalist. She didn't sling mud or revel in the sordid details of Ethan's affair. Instead, she spoke with eloquence and passion about the systemic challenges facing women and children in crisis. She announced that she was leveraging her position on the board and her personal story to launch a new initiative through the Silver Hope Foundation, the Haven Project. It would establish a network of safe houses and resource centers for women who needed to escape abusive or untenable situations, providing them with legal aid, financial counseling, and the tools to build a new, independent life. She had turned her pain into a platform, her personal tragedy into a public mission. She was no longer defined by her relationship with Ethan Vance. She was defined by her work, her resilience, and her commitment to helping others. The public, and more importantly, the city's philanthropic elite, were captivated. Donations poured into the Haven Project. Ava became a celebrated, respected figure, a symbol of strength and grace. While her public life in New York was one of influence and purpose, her private life remained anchored in the quiet simplicity she had found in Port Blossom. She kept the seaside cottage, flying back and forth on a private jet service, a luxury afforded by the very child support payments Ethan was forced to make. The cottage was her sanctuary, the place where she was not Miss Dubois, the formidable board member, but simply Mama. She and Noah would spend weeks at a time there, away from the noise and ambition of the city. Their days were filled with the simple, profound joys she had dreamed of for him. They walked on the beach, collecting shells and watching the sandpipers skitter along the shoreline. She read him stories not from fairy tales about princes and princesses, but from books about brave explorers, brilliant scientists, and courageous artists. She raised him with the sound of the ocean as his lullaby and the lessons of self-reliance and courage as his foundation. She taught him that strength wasn't about how much you had, but about how much you could overcome. She taught him that a home wasn't defined by the size of its rooms, but by the amount of love and truth within its walls. She was building a life of balance and meaning, a life that seamlessly blended the power she wielded in a New York boardroom with the peace she found on a remote Oregon beach. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her cottage, watching Noah take his first wobbly steps on the soft grass, her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry," it read. "I know it's too late, but I am so sorry for everything." It was from Ethan. She read the message, took a deep breath of the salty air, and then deleted it without replying. She had no space for his apology. It was a ghost from a life that no longer belonged to her. Her triumph was not in his regret, but in her own freedom. Vanishing had saved her. Returning had proved her strength. But this quiet, peaceful, authentic life she had built for herself and her son. This was her lasting victory. A year after the gala, Ethan sat alone in the sterile, minimalist living room of a new, smaller apartment. The penthouse, with its ghosts and memories, had been sold at a loss. His company, once a titan, had been forced into a merger, and he was now just a senior executive with a fancy title and little real power, a relic of a bygone era of unchecked ambition. Sienna was a distant memory, her face occasionally smiling out from the society pages, always on the arm of someone more stable, more powerful. He was scrolling through a business journal on his tablet when he saw her. It was a cover story. Ava Dubois, the visionary behind the Haven Project. The photo was of Ava, standing on a bluff overlooking the ocean, the wind catching her hair. She wasn't smiling for the camera. She was looking out at the horizon, a look of serene, unshakable purpose on her face. Noah, now a sturdy toddler, was holding her hand, looking up at her with pure adoration. He read the article, every word a fresh stab to his ego. It detailed the incredible success of her foundation, the lives she had changed, the powerful network she had built. It quoted senators, CEOs, and philanthropists, all praising her vision, her tenacity, her grace. The article mentioned him only once, in a single brutal sentence. Ms. Dubois, formerly married to real estate developer Ethan Vance, has channeled her personal experiences into a powerful force for social change. Formerly married. A footnote in her story. He leaned back, the tablet falling onto the cushion beside him. For months, he had been consumed by what he had lost. His company, his status, his money. But looking at that picture, at the woman she had become, and the son he barely knew, he finally understood the true depth of his loss. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a partner whose quiet strength had been the invisible scaffolding of his entire life. He had lost a woman of incredible substance and resilience, a woman he had been too arrogant and too blind to truly see. He had seen her as a beautiful possession, a reflection of his own success, when in reality, she had always been the source of a light he had foolishly believed was his own. His supervised visits with Noah were stiff, awkward affairs. The boy was polite but distant, a stranger who shared his DNA but not his life. Noah's world was one of love, truth, and the sound of the ocean, a world built by his mother, a world from which Ethan was permanently exiled. He was just a visitor, a brief, twice-monthly interruption in a life that was full and happy without him. He finally understood that losing someone who is willing to walk away, to erase themselves and start anew, is to lose a part of yourself you can never get back. He had thought he was the sun, and she was a planet orbiting him. He was wrong. She was her own universe, and he had been just a passing comet, burning bright and then fading into the vast, indifferent darkness. The realization offered no comfort, no redemption. It was just the cold, hard, and inescapable truth, the final, crushing weight of his own choices. And there you have it, a story of betrayal, resilience, and the incredible power of a woman who refused to be broken. Ava's journey from a gilded cage to a life of true freedom shows us that our greatest strength is often forged in our deepest pain. What did you think of her incredible transformation? Could you have predicted her stunning return? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of love, loss, and redemption. Thank you for watching.